All right, y'all, this is David, the Georgia photographer, and tonight I'm at Cheddar's in downtown Chattanooga, and it's like there's 8 people in the whole city. It's like a giant ghost town because of this whole virus deal. Well, I've got something new I'm gonna do with you guys. We're gonna do a special on how to shoot photography easily.
You dropped your phone.
You probably couldn't even see them because without the lights you probably can't tell, but
Oh, please don't post that.
oh yeah, it's going in the video now, right guys? All right, we're gonna do a shut-in series or something to that effect. So let's do this. And just like that, we're back at home. All right, what I want to talk about is I want to demystify these controls on this camera and make it to where it's not complicated to take good photos. I want it to be able to be done in such a way that the most unexperienced person there is can pick up this camera and get kind of what they're looking for pretty easily. It's come up a couple of times that people are looking for a introduction to a photography kind of class to where they are able to understand what's going on with these controls on the camera, but without all the fuss and the minutia that comes along with learning all these infinitesimal little numbers and the ratios and all of that jazz. And with the technology as it is today and cameras like this one, you can get around some of that early difficulty of learning and metering and all of that sort of thing. And since technology is like it is now, now's your chance to kind of do it the easy way. And I'm going to show you how to basically get the introduction to this sort of thing and understanding what the controls do to a picture really easily. And by doing that, hopefully get some of you people that normally wouldn't be as interested in photography a little more interested. And how I plan to do this is I want to apply the technology that's available in the modern digital camera, mainly this electronic display or the electronic viewfinder display. As long as your camera has a digital display that you can activate in live mode, like my D810 is a fairly old camera by today's standards, and it has live view. If you can activate that mode, then you can easily apply the techniques I'm going to do in this little mini series and get really interesting photos really easily. But now, of course, we're going to need a few things before we start. You're going to need a camera, you're going to need a lens, and you're going to need a subject. That's about it to get started. You don't have to have expensive fancy lights, you don't have to have fancy remote triggers, you don't have to have an expensive tripod made out of carbon fiber. Those things help, but they don't make the fundamentals easier to learn. They just add complexity and people get overwhelmed with all of the things you have to adjust and set and position and do this and that with. We're just going to back it down. You need a camera, you need a lens, and you need something to photograph. Okay, in order for this little mini series to work correctly, we're going to start with setting our ISO. The ISO is this camera sensitivity to light, to automatic. We're going to let the camera do the thinking on ISO for now. That is something that we don't have to really worry about at this time. So we're going to focus on the other 2 modes and understanding what they do and let the camera set the sensitivity. First thing we're going to learn to do is control the aperture. Aperture is the iris. It's the part that lets the light through the lens and how much. All right. All you really got to remember if you're just trying to start is low numbers on the aperture makes the background blurrier, and big numbers on the aperture makes the background sharper or makes it more in focus and less blurry. You'll see photos of like models on the street, and the further down the street it gets, the blurrier it gets. You want to run the lowest number possible on your lens. Don't worry right now if it's got like soft corners or whatever. Just remember, lower numbers will make the background blurrier. It's that easy. I'm going to demonstrate with my model here. I found this toy on the side of the road somewhere and just picked it up and threw it in the truck. I'm starting to collect these little tiny action figures of superheroes. I've got a Batman one I found in a ditch somewhere, and now I have this one from, I think she's one of the Incredibles. But yeah, we're gonna use this as our model. I'm gonna set her on the truck. All right. Now, what we'll do first is we'll shoot one at f/16, which is the biggest number on my lens. I'm gonna try to get level so you can see. And then we're gonna go to the other extreme and go to f/1.2 with it and take a photo as well. And it's a little bit overexposed now. There we go. And you're gonna see the difference. Between these two photos. Now, as you can tell, at f/1.2, a lower number, the background is blurrier, and even to the point that some of the actual object I'm photographing is not in focus. But at f/16, it's a different story entirely. So, just remember that. Low numbers, blurrier background. All right, the next thing you'll want to do for creative control of your camera is learn shutter speed. Two things to know about shutter speed. The faster it is, the less blurrier your pictures are. The slower it is, the more blurry. And it's all in fractions of a second. You'll see 1/15 or 1/2000. 1/2000th is less than 1/15 because it's a fraction. And it goes up to 1 second, you know, and you can have them in the minutes, but for simplicity of this, everything will be from 1/2 second, 1/2, down to 1/8000th. In this camera, it goes to 1/8000th. It's marked on the little dial. Closer to that 1/8000th you get, the better it freezes action. As you can see in these two photos, the first one was 1/15th of a second, and the car has got a little motion blur. I was trying to track it pretty good, but the background is completely blurred out. And then if you'll notice on this one, the ambulance is razor sharp, even though it was doing probably 40 miles an hour going down the road when I took this photo of it. Just keep that in mind if you want creative control of the environment.
The ISO is the necessary evil. You have to have that sensitivity, but the creative part comes in the shutter speed and the aperture, in my opinion. The depth of field, the blur or lack of. So I let ISO be automatic and I control the creative part.
And you can also invert that function by making the camera static and opening the shutter and letting the car drive through it, and the car will be a stripe of blur and the background will be focused and sharp. So you're not obligated to track with the object. You can get different things like light trails. I have a video about light trails here, and that's how I got those light trails. I just opened the shutter for a long time and allowed the cars to drive through it, and their headlights and taillights made those light trails. That's how you control shutter speed to get reasonably sharp photos of humans doing things that aren't athletic in nature. As long as it's just someone walking down the street, or maybe walking their dog, or carrying their groceries, or picking up something off the ground, or whatever like that. 1/250th of a second or faster, which would be 1/500th, 1/1000th, smaller fractions, will freeze that motion pretty well. 1/125th will too, but you're going to start to see a little bit of motion blur in the photos. Street photography runs real good at 1/125th or 1/250th. If you want it to be to where the person's blurry to represent their movement in the frame, slow it down to 1/30th of a second or even 1/15th. 1/15th gets a lot of motion blur. As you can see with the car photo up from earlier, that car was probably doing 30 miles an hour when I tracked it, and it made the background stores just a stripe. It's really interesting how that works. Now that you've got aperture figured out and shutter speed figured out, go take some photos with it. See what you come up with. It's creativity. at this point. That's what you're learning, is creative control of the camera. And it's not complicated once you see what's kind of happening. True to form, I forgot to film the outro while I was in Chattanooga the other day. Now you know what makes a picture blurry and sharp. Get your camera out and go take a picture with it, all right? So until next time, this is David, the Georgia photographer, and I appreciate you guys watching. Y'all have a good one, all right? Bye-bye.